The desert had a way of swallowing sound, leaving only the rasp of wind and the pounding of hooves. Ethan Ward leaned low in his saddle, eyes narrowed against the heat. He had ridden these plains for 30 years, and yet today something felt different. The land was too still, the horizon too empty. Then he saw them, three shapes in the dust, crumpled like discarded cloth. At first, he thought the heat was playing tricks, but as his horse closed the distance, the figures sharpened into bodies young women, Apache by their dark braids and the cut of their dresses. Ethan reined in hard. His horse snorted, tossing its head as he swung down. The closest girl tried to rise, but her legs gave way, dropping her back into the dirt. Her dress was torn, streaked with blood and dust. The younger two clung to her, their faces pale, lips cracked from thirst. Ethan's chest tightened. He had seen cattle left to die, men broken on battlefields, but never this three girls abandoned on open ground. He crouched beside them, the leather of his gloves creaking. "Hold on," he muttered, pulling his canteen free. He tilted it toward the eldest. Her eyes snapped open hard, suspicious, like a wounded animal. For a moment, Ethan thought she might strike him, but her hand trembled and fell useless to her side. The canteen touched her lips. Water spilled down her chin before she swallowed, desperate, shaking. The younger ones reached for it next, clutching like it was life itself. Ethan looked over them, jaw clenched tight. Bruises, blood, ripped fabric. He didn't know who had done this, but he knew cruelty when he saw it. And standing there, with the wind cutting across the plains, he felt the weight of a choice pressing down. Ride on and forget or stay, and face whatever devils had left these girls to die. Ethan steadied the canteen in his hand as the eldest girl drank. She coughed hard, the water spilling onto her torn dress, but she forced down another swallow before pushing it toward her sisters. The smaller one, barely more than a child, gripped the metal with both hands, her lips trembling as if the act of drinking itself hurt. Ethan felt his stomach turn. Whoever had left them here hadn't just wanted them broken, they'd wanted them erased. The eldest lifted her head, her eyes meeting his. They were swollen and rimmed red, but behind the pain was fire, a defiance that startled him. Her cracked voice rasped, almost a whisper. Why help us? You don't know who we are." Ethan shifted, boots grinding against the dirt. He wasn't a man who wasted words. He let his gaze travel over the bruises on her arms, the split in her lip, the way her sisters leaned against her like she was the only thing keeping them alive. "I don't need to know," he said finally. "I can see enough." The middle girl tried to rise then, clutching the youngest against her chest, but her legs buckled. Ethan caught her by the shoulder, surprised at how light she felt, bones under skin. He lowered her gently back to the ground, jaw tightening against the anger that simmered in his chest. His horse stamped behind him, impatient, as if urging him to move on. Ethan looked from the animal back to the three girls. He had ridden alone for years, keeping his own peace, never stopping for anyone else's fight. But now seeing them sprawled in the dust, still clinging to each other despite the beating, they were no longer just strangers. Ethan knew the desert didn't leave room for second chances. If he rode away now, there would be no later. Ethan rose slowly, the canteen still heavy in his hand. The desert stretched endless around them. No shade, no shelter, only three broken girls who had no chance of lasting another hour. His horse tossed its head, reins jingling, as if impatient to move on. For years, Ethan had answered that call: keep moving, keep to himself, never let another man's trouble weigh on him. But this was no ordinary trouble. The eldest girl, Nayeli, he guessed from the way the other two whispered her name, tried to push herself upright again. Her hand shook violently, but her chin lifted, daring him not to look away. Ethan felt something twist inside his chest. She was half his size, beaten nearly to death, yet still burning with pride. He pulled his coat free and draped it across her shoulders. She flinched at first, then clutched it closed, hiding the torn fabric beneath. The younger one, Tiva, buried her face in her sister's arm, too weak to speak. The middle girl, Ahioka, held them both, her eyes glassy with exhaustion. "Easy now," Ethan muttered, slipping an arm under Nayeli's back to lift her. She resisted for a heartbeat, then collapsed into him, her body limp from pain. One by one, he carried them to his horse, setting each carefully against the saddle. They were so light it unsettled him. These were not warriors or bandits, but girls who had been left for dead. Ethan mounted behind them, looping his arm tight to keep them from sliding. The sun was sinking lower, bleeding red into the horizon. He glanced east, toward the town. He could already picture Cole and Mason swaggering in the saloon, laughing at their handiwork, certain no one would stop them. Ethan set his jaw. Maybe he couldn't stop every cruelty the West spat out, but he could damn well stop this one. With a flick of the reins, the horse surged forward, carrying them all out of the dust and into whatever fight waited ahead. The horse carried them in silence, hooves drumming a steady rhythm against the cracked earth. Ethan held the reins in one hand, his other arm bracing the girls against him. Their weight pressed lightly against his chest, too light, too fragile. He'd hauled calves heavier than this, and the thought made his jaw tighten. The sun slid lower, painting the plains in bruised shades of orange and red. The heat still clung to the ground, rising in waves. But the air was cooling now, and with it came the first shivers from the girls. Ethan pulled his coat tighter around their shoulders, feeling the tremors run through them. He aimed for a dry creek bed he knew, a cut in the land where the rocks gave a little shelter. When he swung down, his knees ached from the ride, but he ignored it. One by one, he lifted the girls from the saddle. Niley fought to stand on her own, legs trembling like reeds in a storm. Ethan steadied her, easing her down against a boulder. The others he lowered beside her. For a long moment, they huddled in silence, the desert wind whispering over them. Then Nayeli's head lifted. Her swollen lips moved, voice ragged. "Take the cloth off." Ethan froze, staring. Her hands tugged weakly at the edge of his coat, pulling it aside. She wanted him to see. He knelt, hesitating. He had seen men torn by bullets, bodies gutted by wolves. But nothing prepared him for this. As the fabric shifted, the truth lay bare under the dying light. Bruises black and purple blooming across ribs and stomach. Deep cuts crusted with blood, burns that seared angry welts into skin. He drew a sharp breath through his teeth, and for the first time in years, his hand shook. The other two weren't spared either. Ahyoka's arm was twisted, swollen at the wrist, her cheekbone mottled blue. Tiva, the youngest, bore lashes across her back, raw and blistered. Ethan swore under his breath, a low sound that carried more rage than he'd allowed himself in decades. "Who did this?" he asked, his voice rough. Nayeli's eyes flicked up to his, and in them he saw not weakness, but defiance. "Two men," she whispered. "Cole, Mason." The names came like poison. Ethan felt his gut twist. He knew those names. Knew them from town drifters who swaggered in and out of the saloon, always carrying the stink of trouble. He had heard rumors of cattle gone missing, of threats muttered in the dark. But he had never seen their work so naked, so vile. "They wanted our land," Ahyoka murmured, her voice barely audible. "Our father's land. They said the law wouldn't care, that no one would stop them." Ethan's throat tightened. He looked down at the ground, fists curling into the dust. They weren't wrong about the law. In these parts, paper and words bent easily under the weight of money and cruelty. The sheriff meant well, maybe, but even a good man's back could be broken by fear or bribes. Still, looking at the three sisters huddled before him, Ethan felt something stir in his chest, a steady burn that no law could smother. "You're safe now," he said quietly. He wasn't sure if he was promising them or himself. Nayeli's eyes narrowed. "Safe?" she rasped. "They will come again. Men like them, they always do." Her words dug under his skin. She was right. Men like Cole and Mason didn't quit. They finished what they started. Ethan stared out across the horizon, where the last light bled away into darkness. He thought of his years alone on the ranch, keeping his head down, letting the world's ugliness pass him by. He had told himself it wasn't his fight. But tonight, it was. He stood, shoulders squaring against the night wind. "Then they'll have to go through me." The girl said nothing. Tiva leaned against Ahyoka's side, eyes already closing from exhaustion. Nayeli's lips pressed tight, but in the faint glow of twilight, Ethan saw her chin lift, saw the fire that even blood and bruises couldn't extinguish. Ethan turned back to his horse, pulling his rifle free from the scabbard. He laid it across his knees as he sat near the girls, keeping watch over the land. The West was cruel, yes, but tonight it would learn something else. There were still men willing to stand. The night deepened across the plains, the last streaks of red fading into a cold wash of stars. Ethan sat with his rifle across his knees, the fire he'd built crackling low beside him. The three girls huddled under his coat and saddle blankets, their breathing uneven but steadier than before. He should have been tired, he'd ridden hard all day, but his mind refused rest. Every time his eyes closed, he saw the bruises again, the burns, the way the youngest had clung to his canteen as if it were life itself. He gritted his teeth, anger burning low in his gut. He had seen greed take many shapes on this frontier. Cattle rustlers, swindlers, drunks with too much time and not enough conscience. But what Cole and Mason had done was something else. This was cruelty, naked and deliberate. Ethan rubbed a hand across his weathered face. He wasn't a lawman. He wasn't a preacher or a hero. He was just one rancher, worn down by years and losses he didn't talk about anymore. He had carved out a piece of quiet for himself, on the edge of this unforgiving land, and he had guarded that quiet like a man guards his last breath. But tonight, that quiet was gone. A small sound pulled his eyes back to the fire. Nayeli was sitting up now, one hand pressed against her ribs, the coat sliding from her shoulders. The firelight caught her eyes dark, sharp, filled with a strength that made him pause. She spoke low, her voice gravel against the silence. "They will come again." Ethan held her gaze. There was no pleading in her tone, no request for pity, just certainty. "I know," he said. "They won't stop until we are gone," she whispered. "Until the land is theirs. Men like them, they always come back." Ethan glanced at the rifle in his lap. "Then they'll find me waiting." For a moment, they stared at each other across the flames. Ethan saw it, then the flicker of trust breaking through her suspicion. It wasn't gratitude, not yet, but it was enough. The youngest stirred, mumbling in her sleep. Ahioka pulled the blanket higher over her sister, her thin arms trembling from the effort. Ethan rose, pulling another log onto the fire. At dawn, he saddled his horse and lifted each girl carefully into the saddle. They were too weak to walk, their weight almost nothing in his arms. He swung up behind them, adjusting the reins so they wouldn't slip. The ride would be long, but the town was the only place where law or something close to it still held. As they moved out, the first light spread across the horizon, pale and cold. Ethan's jaw tightened. He knew Cole and Mason would hear about this before sundown. They would be waiting. Maybe they'd already guessed he wouldn't ride past and leave 3 broken girls in the dust. The thought didn't slow him. If anything, it settled the decision harder in his bones. He had lived too long letting other men's cruelty pass by, telling himself it wasn't his fight. But this was his fight now. The girls clung silently as the horse carried them toward the rising Sunday. Naomi leaned against him, her body trembling with each step, but her chin remained high. Ahioka's eyes flicked open and closed, exhaustion battling stubborn will. Tiva lay limp in her sister's arms, breathing shallow but steady. Ethan scanned the horizon, his hand never far from the rifle. Somewhere out there, Cole and Mason were waiting, certain of their power. But for the first time in years, Ethan felt something stronger than fear take root inside him. It was resolve, and he knew it would carry him through whatever fight came next. By the time Ethan reached the ridge above town, the sun had climbed high enough to wash the dirt streets in a blinding glare. He slowed the horse, scanning the rooftops, the alleys, the wide open stretch of Main Street. The girls shifted weakly in the saddle in front of him, and he tightened his arm around them. Something in his gut told him the ride-in wouldn't be easy. Men like Cole and Mason didn't leave loose ends, and leaving 3 beaten girls alive was the kind of mistake they would correct fast. Ethan was right. As he turned down the last bend toward the saloon, 2 riders stepped out from the shade of the livery, horses broad-shouldered, dust coating their coats, guns heavy on their hips. Cole tipped his hat back with a smirk that twisted Ethan's stomach. Mason sat slouched in the saddle, grinning like the whole town was his stage. "Well, I'll be damned," Mason drawled, his eyes sliding over the 3 girls slumped against Ethan's chest. "Didn't we leave you pretty little things for the buzzards?" Cole spat in the dust, eyes hard on Ethan. You've made a mistake, old man. That's not your burden to carry. Ethan pulled the horse to a halt in the middle of the street. Dust swirled around them, catching the light. He kept his hand firm on the reins, but his rifle lay across his thigh where both men could see it. The boardwalk outside the saloon creaked as townsfolk drifted out, curiosity pulling them from shade to Sunday. The blacksmith leaned against his post. The storekeeper wiped his hands on his apron. A few women clutched their children tighter. Nobody spoke. Nobody stepped closer. Ethan felt their silence like a weight pressing down. Too many times, this town had watched cruelty and turned its head. He wasn't surprised, but he wasn't here for their help. His voice cut across the street, low and steady. They're under my care now. You'll not touch them again. Mason laughed, loud and sharp. Your care? You've gone soft, Ward. These girls are nothing but trouble. You'll hand them over, or you'll regret it. Ethan's jaw worked as he stared at the two men. His pulse hammered, but his grip never faltered. He had lived long enough to know fear when it came knocking. This was fear, but it was also choice. He shifted slightly in the saddle, making sure the girls were steady. Nayeli's head lifted faintly against his chest, her bruised eyes catching sight of the men who had done this to her. Ethan felt the tension in her body, the way her fingers dug into his coat. He leaned down, voice low, so only she could hear. Stay strong. We'll end this. Then he nudged the horse forward, right past Cole and Mason. Their hands twitched near their holsters, but they didn't draw. Not yet. Not with the whole town watching. The doors of the saloon swung open as Ethan guided the girls inside. The piano fell silent, chairs scraped against the floor. He could feel eyes on him from every corner of the room, waiting to see what storm he had dragged in. Ethan slid the girls into a booth near the back wall, his coat still wrapped around them. He straightened slowly, rifle in hand, and turned toward the doors just as they creaked open again. Cole and Mason stepped inside, their smirks spreading like poison across the room. The saloon went quiet the moment Cole and Mason walked in. The smell of whiskey and sweat hung heavy, the piano player sliding silently off his stool. Ethan stood with his back straight, rifle loose in his grip but ready. Every eye in the room shifted between him and the two men swaggering through the doors. Cole's voice carried first, smooth and sharp. Look at this. Old Ward playing the hero. His gaze flicked toward the booth where the girls sat huddled beneath Ethan's coat. Picked up some strays, did you? Mason laughed, a sound that scraped like glass. They're ours, Ward. You know it. I know it. Hand 'em back, and maybe we let you limp home. Ethan's stomach turned at the sight of their smug faces. He'd known men like them all as life bullies, who fed on fear, who counted on silence to shield their cruelty. He glanced toward the bar. The townsfolk avoided his eyes, heads bowed, hands tightening around glasses. Nobody wanted to step forward. Before Ethan could speak, movement caught his attention. Nayeli was pushing herself up from the booth, gripping the edge of the table for balance. Her knees shook, but her chin lifted, fire sparking and eyes bruised nearly shut. Ethan's heart lurched. Stay down, he murmured, stepping closer. But Nayeli shook her head. She shoved the coat from her shoulders, bearing torn fabric and livid bruises to the entire saloon. Gasps rippled through the room. You think we will bow to you? Her voice was rough, ragged, but it carried like a bell through the silence. You'll never take our land. Mason's grin faltered. Cole's jaw tightened. Ethan froze, rifle heavy in his hands. He hadn't expected her to speak, hadn't expected her to stand. Yet here she was, trembling but unbroken, calling them out where the whole town could see. A hush fell so deep he could hear the wind pushing dust against the saloon walls. Men at the bar straightened, muttering under their breath. One spat into a glass and shook his head. She's got more fight than half the men in this town, someone whispered. Nayeli's hand shot out suddenly, seizing a half-empty whiskey bottle from the table. With a sharp cry, she hurled it across the room. It smashed against the wall inches from Mason's head, glass shattering, liquor dripping down the wood. Chaos followed. Chairs scraped back, boots thudded against the floor. Mason lunged forward, face twisted with rage. Ethan stepped between them, rifle raised, the butt slamming into Mason's chest to knock him off balance. Cole snarled and reached for his gun, but froze when he saw Ethan's barrel swing up, steady as stone. The room held its breath. Nayeli's voice cut through, steady despite her shaking frame. "You'll have to go through me." For a heartbeat, Ethan felt time pause. The bruised young woman standing tall, her sisters clutching her arms, and the two cowards who had tried to destroy them shrinking under her defiance. The whole town saw it. Every soul in that room bore witness. And for the first time, Ethan realized this wasn't just about protection anymore. This was about dignity, hers, theirs, and maybe his own too. Ethan's pulse thundered in his ears. The saloon had frozen around Nayeli's defiance, the echo of her words still hanging in the smoke-thick air. "You'll have to go through me." Cole's smirk twitched, sliding into a snarl. Mason's jaw worked, fury twisting his face red. For a split second, Ethan thought maybe, just maybe, their arrogance had cracked. But then Mason moved. He lunged across the room, boots hammering against the floorboards, hands outstretched like claws. Ethan stepped forward, rifle swinging low, and drove the butt square into Mason's chest. The man staggered back, gasping, knocking over a chair as he fell. The saloon erupted. Men shouted, boots scraped, tables toppled as folks scrambled to get out of the way. The piano player dove behind his instrument, clutching his hat. Cole's hand dropped to his holster. Ethan's stomach clenched. He raised his rifle, barrel leveled, and barked, "Don't." For a heartbeat, no one breathed. Dust drifted in the shafts of light slanting through the saloon doors. Cole's fingers hovered over the pistol grip, twitching with fury. His eyes locked on Ethan's, measuring the resolve there. Finally, he sneered and let his hand drop, but the smile that followed chilled Ethan more than the steel ever could. "This ain't over," Cole spat. Mason had hauled himself upright by then, coughing, red-faced. He pointed a trembling finger at the girls, huddled in the booth. "They're nothing. Squaws with no claim, no right to that dirt. You're a fool to bleed for them, Ward." Ethan's jaw tightened. He shifted, putting himself between the men and the girls. "They've got more right than either of you'll ever have," he growled. Gasps stirred at the bar. A few of the townsfolk finally lifted their heads. The blacksmith muttered, "About damn time someone said it." Mason roared and charged again. Ethan sidestepped, his shoulders slamming into Mason's side, sending him sprawling across a table. Bottles smashed, whiskey splashing into the air. The crowd scattered, some ducking for cover, others pressing closer to watch. Cole lunged next, fists instead of gun. He swung wide, his knuckles grazing Ethan's jaw hard enough to rattle teeth. Pain flared, sharp and hot. But Ethan planted his boots and drove his fist straight into Cole's gut. The man doubled over with a grunt, stumbling into the bar. The girls cried out behind him, the sound cutting deeper than any blow. Ethan spared a glance, Nayeli bracing against the table, Ahioka clutching Tiva tight. Fear flickered in their faces, but not surrender. Never surrender. Mason came at him from the side, smashing a chair leg across Ethan's back. The crack of wood echoed, pain biting into his shoulders. Ethan staggered, vision flashing white. He whipped around, rifle raised like a staff, and slammed the stock across Mason's jaw. Blood sprayed, Mason crumpling to the floorboards. "Enough," Ethan roared. His voice filled the saloon, sharp as thunder. "This ends here." But Cole wasn't listening. He shoved off the bar, his hand snapping back to his holster. The glint of steel caught the lamplight. Ethan's rifle barrel came up instinctively, locking on Cole's chest. Then, a new sound, boots pounding across the floorboards. The sheriff's voice barked from the doorway. "Hold it right there." The saloon doors banged wide. Sheriff Harlan strode in, rifle leveled, eyes blazing. Behind him, a half-dozen townsfolk pressed forward, voices shouting, "We saw it. We saw what they did." Cole froze, pistol half drawn, caught between rage and caution. Mason groaned on the floor, clutching his bleeding jaw. The room vibrated with something Ethan hadn't felt in years. The town's silence cracking, giving way to a chorus of truth. "She stood tall," someone called. "We all saw her. They beat them near to death. Ward brought him in alive." Cole and Mason tried to finish it here. The sheriff's face hardened. "Drop it, Cole." For a long, trembling moment, Cole's eyes bored into Ethan's. Then, slowly, He let the pistol fall to the floorboards with a clatter. His lip curled. "You'll regret this," he hissed. Ethan exhaled, the rifle lowering, but not relaxing. His arms trembled from the weight, not of the gun, but of what had just passed. He turned, meeting Nayeli's eyes. Bruised, battered, but burning still. And for the first time, he saw not just defiance but trust shining through. The sheriff moved in, snapping irons around Cole's wrists, hauling Mason up by the collar. The townsfolk pressed closer, voices rising. No longer whispers, no longer fearful murmurs now, it was testimony, loud and insistent, wrapping around Ethan like a tide. As the men were dragged toward the door, Nayeli's voice rang out, hoarse but steady. "You'll never take what's ours." The saloon erupted in cheers and shouts. Ethan stood silent in the storm, his rifle heavy at his side, heart pounding with a strange, steady rhythm. He had not come here seeking a fight. He had not asked for this burden. But in that moment, with the town awake and the girls alive behind him, Ethan Ward knew something had shifted. The West was cruel, yes. But tonight, cruelty had been met with a wall it could not break. And Ethan Rancher, widower, loner, was no longer standing alone. The saloon doors slammed shut behind the sheriff as he shoved Cole and Mason into the street, their hands bound, curses spilling from their mouths. Dust rose where their boots dragged, the chain of irons clinking like an ugly song. Ethan followed, rifle still in hand, every muscle coiled tight. He half expected one of them to break free, to whirl with sudden violence. But the fight had shifted. This time, the weight wasn't on Ethan's shoulders alone. The street was alive. Folks poured from shops, porches, the shadows of doorways. Mothers clutched their children closer. Men stood with arms crossed, faces grim. They weren't scattering now. They weren't hiding behind shutters. They were watching, and their silence was heavy, not with fear, but with judgment. Cole spat in the dust. "You think this means anything? We run this town. Always have." "Not anymore," Sheriff Harlan barked, jerking the irons tighter. Mason winced, but his grin never wavered. It was the grin of a man who believed the world would bend back to him, no matter how tight the chains. Ethan scanned the crowd. For years, he had seen these same faces avert their eyes when cruelty strutted by, when the strong bled the weak. But now something burned different. Murmurs rippled, words rising like sparks in dry grass. "I saw her stand," the blacksmith called, his booming voice carrying over the street. "Bruised half to death, and still she stood taller than any man here." Others chimed in. "We all saw it. They tried to kill those girls, and Ward brought 'em back alive. Cole and Mason don't own this place. They've bullied long enough." The chorus grew, louder, steadier, until it was no longer just voices, it was the town itself speaking with one tongue. Ethan felt it in his chest, the shift of a community shaking free from its chains of silence. Behind him, the girls huddled near the saloon doors. Nayeli leaned against the frame, one hand pressed to her ribs, but her chin lifted high. Ahioka held Tiva close, their dark eyes wide as they listened. Ethan caught the flicker of awe on their faces, the same awe he felt inside, though he would never name it aloud. Sheriff Harlan turned, his gaze sweeping over the crowd. "You've heard them. You've seen it with your own eyes. These men will stand trial. Their word means nothing now, not against what we all know to be true." Cole snarled, lunging forward, but the sheriff yanked him back by the irons. Mason muttered a curse, his bravado slipping as the townsfolk shouted him down. Ethan stepped closer, his boots grinding against the dirt. His voice cut through the noise, low but steady. "You think the law bends to you. Maybe it has before, but not today. Today, everyone saw. Everyone heard." He glanced toward Nayeli, who met his gaze with steady fire. "You can't bury truth when the whole town carries it." A hush followed, thick and heavy, before breaking into cheers. The sound rolled like thunder, filling the street. For once, it wasn't fear echoing, it was pride, relief, the sound of a people reclaiming their voice. Ethan let the rifle lower at his side, his arms aching with fatigue. He felt the weight of the past hours pressing into him, the ride through the desert, the bruises etched into the girl's skin, the chaos of the saloon. But beneath the exhaustion stirred something steadier, heavier, purpose. He looked again, at the sisters. Nayeli's face was pale, but her eyes blazed. Ahioka whispered softly to Tiva, who clung to her sleeve, trembling but alive. They weren't just survivors. They were symbols, now proof that cruelty could be defied, even by those the world thought powerless. Sheriff Harlan jerked the prisoners forward, marching them toward the courthouse at the end of the street. The crowd surged after, boots stomping, voices rising. For once, the town wasn't shrinking back. It was rising up. Ethan fell into step beside the girls, guiding them carefully down the boardwalk. Nayeli stumbled once, and his hand shot out to steady her. She nodded faintly, pride stiff in her movements, unwilling to lean too much on anyone. But her whispered words reached him all the same. They saw us. He glanced down at her. They did, and they believed. Ethan swallowed hard, his throat tight. For all his years riding the frontier, he had forgotten what belief looked like. Now, in this battered young woman's voice, he heard it clear. The courthouse loomed ahead, its wooden steps crowded with townsfolk pressing to witness what came next. The sheriff hauled Cole and Mason inside, their curses fading beneath the swell of voices. Ethan guided the girls to the steps, his jaw set, heart pounding. This was no longer about a single rancher helping three strangers. This was about justice, fragile but real, taking root in a place where too long it had been trampled. As the doors shut behind them, Ethan lifted his eyes to the sky. The evening sun burned low, casting long shadows across the town. For the first time in years, he felt something stir beyond anger, beyond survival. He felt the land itself hold its breath, waiting. Maybe tomorrow would bring more violence. Maybe Cole and Mason had allies, or maybe the law would bend again. But tonight, at least, the town had spoken. Tonight, cruelty had been dragged into the light, and no one could pretend they hadn't seen. Ethan rested his rifle against his shoulder, standing firm beside the three girls as they entered the courthouse. Whatever came, he knew one thing as surely as he knew the feel of dust in his lungs. They weren't alone anymore. The courthouse smelled of pine and sweat, the benches creaking under the weight of half the town pressed shoulder to shoulder. Ethan sat near the front, rifle laid across his knees, the three girls close beside him. Their bruises and torn clothes drew stares, but no one looked away this time, not with the truth still burning in their memory. The judge entered, robes plain but voice iron. Cole Mason, you stand accused of assault, attempted theft, and conspiracy to drive these young women from their rightful land. How do you plead? Cole sneered, his lip curling. Not guilty. Mason smirked beside him, nodding as if the whole matter were a joke. A murmur rippled through the room, low, angry, restless. Ethan's hand tightened on his rifle. He felt the tension in the girls beside him, Nayeli's breath catching, Ahioka clutching Tiva closer. The sheriff stepped forward, voice steady. I saw them in the saloon. I saw Ward defend these girls, when Cole and Mason tried to finish what they started, and I wasn't the only one. Heads nodded across the benches. Voices rose. We saw it. She stood against them. Ward brought them back from death's door. The judge's gaze swept the room before settling on Clara. No, Nayeli, proud, even through the bruises. Do you wish to speak? Ethan's chest tightened as she rose, leaning heavily on the bench but refusing his arm. Her voice, raw and shaking, carried clear. They tried to break us. They wanted my father's land. They told me no law would save me, but I said no, and I'll keep saying no. The room erupted in murmurs of approval, some clapping, some pounding the benches with fists. The judge lifted a hand for silence, his eyes narrowing on Cole and Mason. Ethan watched their smirks falter, the swagger bleeding out of them under the weight of so many witnesses. For the first time, he saw fear in their eyes, not of him, but of truth spoken aloud. The gavel struck, sharp as thunder. Guilty. You will serve your time behind iron, and this town will remember you not as men of power, but as cowards who preyed upon the weak. Cheers broke loose. Women wept, men shouted, boots stomped the floor. Ethan exhaled slowly, the tightness in his chest easing. He turned to the girls. Nayeli's eyes glistened. Ahioka's lips trembled. Tiva buried her face in her sister's shoulder. For the first time since he'd found them broken in the dust, Ethan saw relief wash over their faces. Fragile, yes. Temporary, maybe, but real. He laid a hand gently on Nayeli's shoulder. It's over, he murmured. And for the first time, he almost believed it. The courthouse doors closed behind them, leaving the noise of justice served to fade into the evening air. Ethan guided the three girls down the steps slowly, his rifle still slung at his side, though for the first time in days it felt lighter. The street was quiet now. Families returned to their homes, lamps glowed in windows, and the hum of life replaced the tension that had ruled the town. Ethan paused, letting the cool dusk air settle across his skin. The girls stood near Nayeli, straight and unyielding despite her wounds. Ahioka steadying Tiva, who clung to her sleeve with sleepy eyes. He looked at them in silence. They weren't kin, not by blood. Yet something inside him shifted. They had been left for dead, and now they stood alive, unbroken. And because of that, he no longer felt like a man carrying his burdens alone. Nayeli's gaze found his, her bruised face lit by the fading Sunday. You gave us more than safety, she whispered. You gave us hope. Ethan lowered his head slightly, voice rough. Then we'll keep that hope, together. He led them toward his horse, steadying each girl as they climbed onto the saddle. When he mounted behind, the sky stretched wide, orange bleeding into purple, stars pricking the horizon. For years, he had ridden alone across that same horizon, a man without ties. Now, for the first time, he felt the land offer something back. Not silence, but purpose. As the horse moved forward, the three girls leaned against him, breathing steady, no longer ragged with fear. Ethan kept his eyes on the open land ahead. Tomorrow would bring challenges, but tonight, he believed in tomorrow. If this story resonates with you, please subscribe and like so you don't miss out on more heartwarming Wild West stories. Leave a comment. If it were you, would you be as brave as Nayeli and Ethan? Your answer is what keeps these Wild West stories alive.